Religion, for centuries, has been a key predictor of charitable giving. But what happens if I'm a fundraiser for a secular nonprofit? Well, there is good news for you as well. Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the Fundraising School, and I'm joined today by Dr. David King. David leads the Lake Institute on Faith and Giving at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, and the Lake Institute is preeminent in providing research and practical advice and guidance on the connection between religious faith and charitable giving, including for secular nonprofits. And David, first of all, some updated research came out at the end of 2017. And as I understand, you and your colleagues again have confirmed there is this strong connection that if somebody is religiously active, they are much more likely to be charitable with their giving. What did you and your colleagues find?
Yeah, we found that religious affiliation continues to be one of the best predictors of giving. But it's important to note that people of all different types of religious affiliation, Christian, Muslim, Jew, other, that this holds across the board. But one key finding was it's not simply, as you might imagine, clearly those who with religious affiliation would give to religious organizations. But what we found is actually continues to be true is that religious affiliation is a good predictor of giving across the board, across to all charitable organizations.
So if we look at maybe kind of three types of organizations, the religious congregation, the religiously identified organization, which some people might call a parachurch organization, some sort of a faith-based social service provider, Jewish community center, and so forth, and then the non-religiously identified organization, we find people of faith across all of those segments, including the secular organizations, correct?
Right, and so it's hard for us sometimes to use language around religion, partly because religious organizations oftentimes really are narrowly defined around congregations and missionary organizations. But many organizations that we might think of as secular have some type of faith-based connection. They may have been historically founded that way, or a number of religiously inflected social service, humanitarian agencies. And what we find is that when you think about that sector of congregations alongside these religiously identified organizations, that's almost 3/4 of organizations in our charitable space. But thinking broadly about the religious organizations that are out there beyond congregations is an important step. But what we also know is that individuals themselves are likely to give to any type of organization, religious or non.
Based on somebody's religious faith, they might feel led to give to a secular organization, a youth agency, an arts organization, a public university, where you and I both work. What advice do you have for fundraisers working in those secular organizations? I mean, we talk about doing donor research, helping understand a donor's motivations, but my nonprofit, by definition, is not directly aligned with their religious congregation, and yet your data show they still could become a donor. How do I go about doing that research to learn more about that donor?
Well, we know that 55% of all Americans give out of spirituality, religion, or values. So a majority of all donors are giving in some form or fashion out of that value set. So the first thing that we would say is not to write someone off simply because you might label them as a religious donor and you don't think there's a connection to your organization. So I would actually dig into the types of organizations in which they give. And think particularly about the own value set of your own organization, and think about holding fast to your own mission, vision, and values. But what are those connections? And I think particularly donors, religious or not, what we do know from research is craving, following their giving alongside their passions and their values, maybe less out of obligation, and oftentimes they struggle knowing what that value set is. And so our organizations, religious or not, should be in the practice of helping do that discernment work with our donors.
And there's kind of that old saw in society, whenever you meet somebody, don't discuss politics and don't discuss religion. Does that apply to fundraising? If I know that that prospective donor has a religious background, I work for a secular nonprofit, how do I have that conversation? Do I say, hey, did you go to church this weekend? Did you go to synagogue this weekend? Again, David, what advice do you have? I mean, we live in this wonderfully diverse, pluralistic country. People have different values. We can be stronger together, cross lines of difference. But talking about religion can be awkward.
Right.
What advice do you have for fundraisers?
Well, I think actually steering clear of some of the more troublesome categories around religion that oftentimes get lumped into political conversations, let's say. But I think the first step for fundraisers is to find their own comfort level with these subjects. So religious or not, fundraisers can do some of their own homework in many ways of understanding their values for why they give and why they are in the work of development. And I think just like any relationship with donors, particularly major givers, this is a long-term, patient process. And you need to, instead of asking the questions of, hey, were you in church last Sunday? What about asking questions about, questions you already would ask about their family, their hopes, their dreams. And when those conversations turn towards spiritual topics, not running away from it, but letting it sit there and probe and discerning questions. So it's less institutional and focused and more letting those questions and values sets come up in conversation.
At the fundraising school, we talk about how, most of us are fully abled. We have 2 eyes, we have 2 ears, we have 1 mouth, so that we should be observing and listening 80% of the time and only talking 20% of the time when we're fundraising with any prospective donor. And David, that's one of the things I gleaned from your reply there is that, to just listen to that donor, listen to their heartbeat. If they start talking about their faith background, to maybe affirm that, maybe reflect that back, and that could be a comfortable way to help talk with the donor.
Yeah, I think listening is key and asking questions that open the door, and then and when appropriate, to sort of keep the door open and continue the conversation. You don't have to be an expert, and this is what I would tell fundraisers, you don't have to become an expert in every faith tradition or a practitioner thereof, but you can learn some basics and feel comfortable with a lot of different religious traditions and backgrounds, and be comfortable speaking about maybe deeper matters, because donors are going to want to talk about it.
And David, we know there are so many influences to charitable giving. There are 7.5 billion people on planet Earth, and they could all have similar but also distinct motivations for giving. And now we're just talking about religion in particular. There's certain things about people give more when they have more, and things like marriage and home ownership and parenthood and these different things, age, can be predictors of charitable giving as well. Where does religion fit in with some of those other kind of standard markers that fundraisers watch for when they're doing donor research?
Yeah, religion becomes, again, one of the best predictors alongside all of those as far as if someone will be a giver and the regular sort of the size of their gift and the continual practice of that gift. But all of those factors that follow givers generally also follow religious givers. So thinking about marital status, education, and income, those typically fall in line, except for the fact that what we think that we're seeing through some of the studies we've done is that religious givers tend to be less elastic in their giving. So they oftentimes might give to religious causes first, and will continue to give regardless of the recession or tax reform or other types of incentive type of work, because that is sort of less giving out of the excess and more giving out of a sense of regular practice or duty or obligation. So it's something to look for as we think about tax reform, we think about the economic cycles, how religious Americans practice that a little bit differently in some ways.
As we've been talking about donor research, David, we've been talking about some of the informal methods. Are there formal ways I can find out if a prospective donor is a person of faith? I might be able to find out where they went to school. I might even be able to find out their political affiliation or that they belong to a Rotary Club or something like that. Informally, I might be around the board table and somebody might tell me a prospective donor is a person of faith. Are there formal ways to find this out as well?
Typically not, and we don't really know too many of them. I think in many ways, looking at their donor history is one great place, and so you can see if they have a local church or they're affiliated with maybe a donor advised fund at the National Christian Foundation, for instance. So I think it really is less specific research and more hunting. But I do think particularly this relational question is key, and so it might be the best method is to connect with one of your own board members or others that you trust who've had those relationships, who know a bit more about someone. In many ways, those places, faith communities or other boards, is where you where you find out these things, these questions about individuals and their motivations for why they give.
That's great advice. And David, as we move forward, you've worked directly with the people who've come out with the study about the rise of the nuns, as more Americans are not identifying with a religious affiliation. What do you think is going to happen with charitable giving if that trend continues?
Well, I think short term, not too much, because what we see with the rise of the nuns, more and more people disaffiliating from a religious tradition, and alongside disaffiliation, you have sort of decreasing attendance and engagement patterns, is that what we think is happening is many of these people have been on the outside edges of a faith community for a number of years. And so what we also know is then that oftentimes means they're less likely to give than those who are sort of inside and engaged. Long term, I think it's an important question because over the next 20 years, the next generation, if these trends continue, we will see an increasing disaffiliation. America is a unique philanthropic context compared to even some of our other Western neighbors like Europe and Canada. So I think there'll be a vibrant third sector. But I guess fundraisers should think about not only this will hurt religious organizations potentially, but religiously affiliated Americans continue to give across the board. So the open question is, will those who disaffiliate simply move their charitable giving to other sectors and other causes, or are we actually looking at a decrease in charitable giving across the board?
And we're so fortunate that the Lake Institute on Faith and Giving is going to be watching those trends for us. They have a lot of technical assistance and data already that you can utilize. You can follow the Lake Institute on our website at philanthropy.iupui.edu. You'll also find the courses from the Fundraising School as well as our quarterly webinars. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, and you are up to date on this first day from the Fundraising School.